Salt Spring, we say, oh, the Galiano Conservancy, what have they did? What did they did? And so it's actually, you guys are an inspiration to those of us on Salt Spring and other Gulf Islands to just like do it. Let's just do it and let's figure out how to do it. And anyway, so I'm very pleased to have sat in today on things. So I was asked to speak specifically about some of the work that I've been doing across the region. So, coastal, British Columbia, kind of the coastal Douglas-Fir, biogeochromatic and associated ecosystem zone on the issue of fire. And so that's why it has the title here, which is we are not the mainland. And that is something that we can, that very easily people get caught up in the news, which is, like, I know since last September, the previous year, we were preparing for the worst fire year ever, but it was never going to be in coastal BC. And so one of the things that I kind of see is that a need to remind ourselves that we're in a different ecology, that we have different weather and different climate, and yes, it's going to get worse, but not to get caught up in the messaging that we're getting from the mainland, from the forestry sector, from the very different ecologies and systems, actively, aggressively managed large-scale commercial forestry. That's not us. So I'm going to start today a little bit with that context, because I think it's really good to remind ourselves of where we are, so that we don't get caught up in this sort of media, news and fearfulness. And then I want to talk a little bit about some of the work that I'm doing on Salt Spring Island around fire risk reduction. And I never say fire prevention. It's really trying to understand fire and what's normal about fire. And then one comment I'll make about the workshop we just had. We had one I organized one in 2023 with the CRD, BC Wildfire Services, and sort of the official agencies responsible for fire and managing fire. And so their perspective is that our fire risk is low compared to the rest of the province. And so the way they look at it is we can respond really quickly when there's a fire. And I know that's not reassuring for anyone in our area. And so this year, what we did after a lot of lessons, a lot of conversations about what are the kind of things that we can do, then we had another workshop, thanks to the University of Victoria. We hosted it there. Raincoast was a co-organizer with it, a number of NGOs, really, really grassroots conversation. Many Indigenous communities sent practitioners to have this conversation. And sort of what we concluded there is fire is normal. Fire is normal and fire is natural, but not in the way that we are seeing it now. And so I want to root us in this area, and then I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing and some of the ideas around fire risk reduction. So this is a little bit of me. It's like I've been working on climate change adaptation risk assessment since about 2004 or 5, and it just nothing happened. And then all of a sudden people kind of got people jump in and they don't quite get the right idea. And I thought Lisa probably would appreciate that. It's like, the information's a bit confusing and people aren't sure really what it means. So in 2011, we have people like, oh, okay, tomatoes in Northern Ontario and Churchill and, these kind of strange things. That's when I was working in Ottawa, people in Agriculture Canada were actually saying that. And then what I see, in 2023, I was like, oh, everything for, it's all about carbon and emissions reduction. And no one's really talking about climate adaptation, which is really where I come from on things. I love being in rural settings and also working with farmers and Indigenous people who really understand the land. And what I often do when I'm giving a public talk is I have a poll to see what people are actually concerned about. And people, I'm not sure where emissions are on here, but actually people are really worried about fire and drought. Like if you live in the land and it, then you actually understand the risk a lot better. So I really feel like this is the audience, and this kind of grassroots conversation is what really needs to happen. So for the Gulf Islands, fire is possible, and a catastrophic fire is, I think, what we want to prevent. But the risk relative to the mainland is much lower. So what we've been seeing more is smoke season. And certainly, I noticed this year, I don't know if it's true here, we have far fewer tourists on Salt Spring than we did in the last 10 years, but we have no fires on the mainland. So we're not getting the smoke tourists. We're not getting people who are leaving fire and leaving smoke. So a lot of that, the effects of what's going on in the mainland does have implications for us, but it can be quite different. And when we look at, so this chart that you see on the right, so that is area burned during BC wildfire services, and on the left, it's starting 2003, and it's going up to 2023 on the right-hand side. So, and it goes from 0 to 21, I think it's 21,000 square kilometers. So 2023 was a really bad year, but almost all of that was on the mainland. So again, just to reiterate that point, that is not us. In fact, the fire that everyone talks about is the Galiano fire. Was anyone here when that fire happened? Okay. How big was it?
Big enough.
It was big enough, we had the water bomb. It was terrorizing.
Okay, what year was that? 2006, okay, and what caused that fire?
People, human problems.
The human cause, it was a zombie fire. It was a slash pile that held over the winter and we reignited.
Those are the most common types of serious fires that we have in the Salish Sea coastal areas. In fact, well, I'll probably repeat this to you again later, but on Salt Spring, 95% of fires in the fire department's memory are all human caused, and they could be zombie fires, but they have to do with burning, and they're not intentional fires, they're just fires that people didn't manage properly. Very different than on the mainland. So I looked at the statistics around this graph from the province are actually quite surprising, that just under 50% of all the area burned on the mainland, the wildfires were caused by people. So it's not so different on the mainland, but the story that we hear is really different. And so you're hearing my biases here. So we talk about climate change, but the good news with this is that most of the problem is us. And so so anyway, I won't get ahead of myself. Because, papers have been coming out increasingly, because it takes a long time to get the data. It's not like this is new insights, but the data are showing clearly that this large-scale forestry practice, industrial forestry on the mainland is not just responsible for fires from leaving slash, from these zombie fires, but young tree densities that grow up that are more vulnerable to fires, but also the flash flooding and the washouts are also related to that. So to me, this is good news, because when we're at fault, that means there's something we can do about it. So one of the things that I see all the time is it's always climate change's fault. Who's fire? Climate change. It's not. So one of the messages that I really want to make is that we have a lot of control, a lot of things that we can do. There's much that we can do, and that climate change is just simply an overarching driver that increases our vulnerabilities. So if we know where our vulnerabilities are, then we can reduce the effect that it's having. The importance of forests are, this is just, maybe this is obvious to everyone, but really when you have forests, you have cool and wet. And what I see in a lot of communities is people xerifying their lawns so they don't have to water. And what they're doing is they're removing these multi-layer canopies, and they're reducing the organic inputs and all the various characteristics that create windbreaks, that create shade, multi-level canopies, more shade, more humidity held in there. This evapotranspiration, where the trees are releasing molecules into the air that are nucleating for condensation of water and keeping the water in a local area, as opposed to xerifying, which is what I see when I look on the right. And so I don't know if I often, when I'm driving in the summer through Cowichan Valley, I look and you see this haze. And that haze is all the moisture that is leaving the soils, and the soils are getting compacted. That reduces their permeability for groundwater. And so the workshop that we had this year, we were talking about everything. We were talking about fire, but fire in the landscape and how everything is interconnected. The other thing that I think is really good about this geographic area, and there's no coincidence why I chose to live here, Part of it is that I wanted to be in a community where people actually did stuff rather than just people talking about what we should do, or actually doing things. And then also this ecosystem. So this is one of the regions that's going to be the least impacted by huge, intense climate weather events relative to the rest of North America. We're going to see much, much less. We're seeing a lot, but if you want to see a lot more, you can move anywhere east and you'll see things much worse there. But the other feature of this area that's really important is that the coastal Douglas fir and associated ecosystems are largely fire resistant ecosystems. We've got the Gary Oak Meadows, which are fire systems, but they are at the top of peaks, and these are fire systems and grasslands that are small and patchy, and they burn in a particular way, and the trees can survive it. The overall coastal Douglas fir systems are just filled with fire-resistant plants. So these thick, waxy leaves that have very low flammable oil content, and so they have very low flammability index. So it's not that they don't burn, but they're very resistant to fire. And in fact, there was a fire in that was around Ladysmith about 4 years ago. There was a very, very hot fire in a clear cut beside a second growth kind of rundown forest stand. And the firefighters could not approach it because it was so hot. And what they noticed is when it hit the wall of trees, even in a degraded state, the fire started to lose its intensity just because of the moisture that was available from those plants and the resistant property of the edge species. And then they were able to actually physically go in and put it out. So this is anecdotal, but it really, we should be feeling very good that this system that we're in has a natural resistance in the plant communities to fire. This is just to give you a perspective on fire risk from the perspective of government. So most of what we hear is relating to industrial and built infrastructure. So when they're talking about fire and fire risk, so when you look at this map and what it says here is 2021 Provincial Strategic Threat Analysis for BC Wildfire Services. And so the greens are lower fire risk and the red are the higher. And so it's not necessarily true, but from the the perspective of the government, what they're interested in is the forestry areas where fires are likely to start and where there's a lot of values. There's a lot of commercial value and jobs associated with that. And then communities, high density communities and built infrastructure that are close to an area that could have an intense fire. So this is kind of a bit of a biased view. And if you look, you see that our area is all in gray, which is no data. And so that doesn't mean we don't have fire risk, but the reason why it's in this color is because most of our region, this sort of CDF coastal region, is privately owned property. And that means that the government is not reporting on it and it does not have any direct oversight or agency to do anything about it. And they certainly don't report on private property. So what you see is kind of a no data zone. The perspective of government also is very much driven by the perspectives on the mainland, which is that fire is related to forestry, it's related to forests, it's related to fuels on the ground. And so this is from North Cowichan. It's a sign, it's kind of maybe hard to see in here, but you can see they have a before and after. So before fire management, and they're showing trees on the ground, and then afterwards they remove those trees. But when I look at this, I don't really see the things that we should be seeing. I see a dense, very dark forest. I see trees that are really close together and small and probably struggling and not going to survive. So the potential for blowdown is high if we have a windstorm. And I also see that they've removed all the organic inputs. And so this is not an ecological approach, but what it is it's a very fuel-centric approach. If we don't want to have fire, then we remove fuel. And that's a very short-term perspective on fire. So this is something, so the CRD did a fire exposure mapping exercise last year. And so I'm just showing, I just pulled this out for Galiano. I don't know Galiano very well, so I'd be really interested to hear people's reaction to the spots that are red on here. Where was the fire, that big Galiano fire? Can anyone? Where that was?
It was,
I know.
it started here.
Is that yellow spot, yeah?
It started here, and then the wind was taking it into the heritage forest, which had piles of slash in it left by developers. And it started, in a burn pile that had been burning demolition, which was actually illegal. And then they stirred it up. The next year, when the wind was blowing, it was very hot, and that's how it started.
Okay.
So that's this area here.
So this area in yellow, so the fire was reduced by the removal of those fuels, so it is approved.
During an equipment closure.
During an equipment closure. So at the other area, so this map, so the risk assessment that was done, this exposure assessment that was done, it's still infrastructure oriented. But it also looks at crown lands, so crown lands, where the population lives, this is what it's looking at in terms of aspect, slope, the kind of tree density that they have, and so they come up with this, and I think it's a much more realistic idea of where, sort of the hotspots that a fire could start and spread are. But as I said, so I've got this other range here, so if we include the whole Salish Sea, the lowest percentage of human fire caused fires that I could find a report of was 67%, and that was for an area around Cortez, which again is different kind of area than we are. And so lightning strikes are not common, so there's a lot that we can do about this. The reason why we're seeing a lot of this, and from the bits of Galiano that I visited, it looks similar to Salt Spring and other Gulf Islands that I've been to, where we have heavily modified landscapes where we've got Gary oak meadows that are overgrowing with dead fir, and the Gary oaks are dying, or we have arbutus that are being encroached on by these sort of middle-aged, post forestry regrowth of dead firs dominating everywhere, and we're getting a lot of shading, and this puts stress on the system. It's a natural stress, and so the trees now are reaching around 60 to 80 years, and this is sort of a stage where they normally would self-thin. What's different is the extent of the harvests that have happened means that it's a continuous strip rather than being more patchy, where one little area would have a blowdown and then it would regrow and so forth. So we have more, what I consider to be almost like a boreal forest landscape, where it's all the same age. It looks like a plantation, even though it really isn't necessarily. And this means that we're approaching this stage with blowdown, that we have high fuel loads, and we have a lot of people, more on Salt Spring than here, but people live right in the forest. So we have very high wildland urban interface. Again, this is really different than the mainland. The mainland, we have population, we have little concentration pockets of people, and then forestry in between them. So they're still at risk, but in a different way. We actually live in the fire interface. And so that's why I think we understand the risks more directly. I'm sorry the slides are turning out so dark here.
You should be able to press that blue button and that top bar will go away.
That's at least something. Today, what I wanted to talk about is the Maxwell watershed, Maxwell Creek watershed on Salt Spring Island as a microcosm of sort of this whole, what we're seeing in this area. And I've sort of broken down the issues that we're looking at, in the Southern Gulf Islands and the Salish Sea. We have a lot of things in common, and history really has a big role to play in the vulnerabilities that we're currently experiencing. So we have, 150 years of intensive land alteration, and sometimes it's more trees coming in, and sometimes it's less trees. We have a history of intensive logging and land clearing, farming, which cleared land, but also drained wetlands. And so we have a general drying of the landscape and a lot of changes to the cover. We have people who have settled. So in the coastal Douglas fir biogeoclimatic zone, which does include Vancouver, actually that area has 95% of the entire population of BC. So this region that we're in is the most heavily populated in the area of the province. And in our areas like here, and I was asking Chesney about Galiano, it's something like around 20% crown land, but you know, about 80% private, which includes conservation areas, which typically are privately owned or managed on the islands. So we've got this very different landscape to the mainland, which is 80% crown, 20% private. We're sort of the opposite. We've moved into an area that had been clear cut and drained, and now we're living in it. And so it's not this fire resistant, mixed, really biologically diverse and structurally complex systems. It's a much more simplified system. And then if I say, well, climate change, well, all it does is it amplifies the risk. So climate change is not the problem. Climate change is simply a driver that is increasing the risk. So what you see here is I've circled the area of the Maxwell Peak watershed here. So this is a lake that was identified after we did, I did a risk assessment and for climate impacts for Salt Spring Island for a climate action plan that we did. And then I talked to the local governments and the community, the Conservancy, and said, what's an area of really high concern? And it was this watershed area here. It's a potable water supply to the northern part of the island and Ganges. And it also is an extremely high fire risk. So the potential of fire, and if water bombers had to come or chemical treatments for fire, that would render the lake unusable for potentially decades. So the risk of a fire is high and the people are very concerned. So we're doing restoration work there. The area was protected from clear cut logging. You see it on the right-hand side. The outline of the watershed, you can see here, this is a picture, this is from 2022 on the left, and that's 1957 on the right. And so clear-cut logging happened, I think, at least twice, and then with selective logging between about 1900, which was the first time that the area was completely clear-cut, up till the 1990s, when the community took the initiative to purchase the area. But I'm flagging a couple things here, and one is on, you can see at the top right there, 1957 aerial photograph, Maxwell Farm drained wetland. So the arrow on the top, or the star on the top, is showing you a large open area that was a huge wetland. This watershed flows from the bottom right, the dry lake, which is at the back side or the north side of the Methodson or Mount Maxwell. And it is spring fed, and that water is really important. It flows from the southeast to the northwest, and it actually is part of what's stabilizing the lake levels. So the groundwater is actually very important in this watershed. And what you see there is the history of probably around 1900, the Maxwell farmsteaders came and they drained the wetlands because this is beautiful, organic, thick soil. And so that is a legacy, and you can see roads as well. And then the bottom right, you see dry lake, which is the headwater. And that was also an area that was drained. So between clear cutting, road construction, culverts, diversions, draining of wetlands, and then you come to modern day on the left, you can still see those 2 points. What you can see here is this Maxwell farmstead is growing in, so the trees are starting to grow in, so that wetland is disappearing. There's still equisetum or the horsetail present, but it's drying up. Even in the 4 years that I've been working there, I can see it drying up. And then the dry lake also is it is not a lake, but I think I've got a couple pictures. The other thing you can see is since 1957, and it's been growing back, incredibly dense forest. And so I've often looked to the previous work of the Galiano Conservancy that did thinning, some of the first thinning in our region, and talked to Keith, and an old growth tree density would be maybe 250 to 350 trees. And we've got in this area around the lake where there's some commercial thinning, it's about 1,500 to 2,000 trees per hectare. We've got this area here, which was a wetland that was culverted and ditched all the way around to drain it. So you can see big cedar stumps in there and dead fir. All the culverts are still working, all the drainage is still working, then they planted white pine in there. Don't ask me why, but they all died. 30,000 trees, stems per hectare in there, that's our worst fire spot in the whole area. So we have incredibly closed canopy, never planted, other than this one weird experiment here. And so the point that I'm trying to make is that there's a lot of legacy effects, and often they're things that you can't see. So here you can see here's the Maxwell farm, and when we use the, I've just walked away, but I'm pointing at the bare earth image on the right. And so I hope you can see that this is the old Maxwell farmstead, and they were intercepting the water. It was flowing across the landscape and the groundwater with a really huge trench to intercept the water that was moving up, to keep their fields dry. And then there was even micro topography within the fields, and they put these irrigation lines in, and these ones are running kind of east-west, and we've got sort of northwest, southeast, and so they knew exactly how the drainage was happening, and these are all still there. And so these are draining the wetlands, and that's why that area is drying up, because every day of year is still being drained. This is an image of Dry Lake, and you can see from more recent aerial photo here, you see two linear features, never natural. As far back as I can look, even when this was a big clear cut, and some images from the 1940s, these trenches were already there. The rim of the lake was breached, and so what they were doing is draining this lake, and it's unclear whether it was for farming or whether it was for forestry. But irrespectively, they have put these trenches in and about 100-meter stretch of very large and deep ditch to continue draining this. And the point that I'm making here is that we talk about climate change, but the reality is that these effects that happened with settler practices were introduced here, even though since 2002 this is being protected, these are still working, they're still draining the landscape. So when I was up here with Robin Anschild, and we did a core, and we looked at for evidence of the water table, and what I took away from that is that the maximum groundwater table is approximately a meter lower than what it could be if we could start to remove some of the ditches. So there's a lot of work that's going to need to happen, but the community is really most immediately concerned with the issue of fire. And to me, the two things are so interconnected. If we don't recover the groundwater table and we get more drought days, then there's fewer days with those trees having access to the groundwater table. So then that's exacerbating the vulnerability of our forests. So you can't do one without the other. And so you see some of our forest area, and as I said, this is just natural blowdown, but the extent of it, sometimes there are hectares and hectares just of continuous blowdown. So what we did, so this is kind of a time scale of the things that we just got started in 2020. And I should mention that I'm sort of the science body of Transition Salt Spring, which you may be familiar with, doing the rebate programs and helping people in the community. We've recently started to do some toy and clothing exchanges, repair cafes, things like that. But I'm actually running this climate adaptation research lab is what I'm calling it. And it's an experimental area in this watershed that's owned by the Improvement District to manage and steward the watershed and the water supply for the community. And so this first part that I've just passed through is a fire risk and fire risk reduction part of our assessment of the watershed. We've set up a lot of long-term monitoring stations for pre and post, and also to get a better sense of what's going on across the landscape. And even though it looks very homogenized, I noticed in some of the photos somebody was showing that here's some dead fir, and then boof, you see some cedar, and that's the same kind of thing that we see. And to me, that tells you there's something different going on below the ground. And then we're trying to do our forensic detective work and start to identify what wants to be here, even though the dead fir are there. What can we take this, what does this want to be, and what can it support? So I'll just talk to you a little bit about how we approach this. people talk about fire, and I learned a lot by working with someone named Robert Seaton from Brinkman Earth Systems, and he works a lot with First Nations up and down the coast, but they also are like a silviculture organization that helps with more ecological and sustainable approaches. And so I had Robert come and teach me and others how to see the fire risk and how to do the assessment of fuels in the landscape. And so what you see here is, one level of fuel is canopy. And canopy, would be a catastrophic fire. If a fire gets into the canopy, what you don't want is all the trees to be touching each other, because then with the wind, a fire can just blow right through the area. So this is something that is a really big concern. The others are coarse and fine fuels, and I don't have a really good picture of just coarse and just fine, but the photo on the top you can see is mostly coarse, so coarse being like larger than the diameter of your thumb. And the way that you can think about things like this is, if you're starting a fire in your fireplace and you have big pieces of wood, it's not very easy to start a fire, and it's also true here. So you need the fine and the coarse together to really create the highest potential for ignition to launch, turn into something and grow. So it's not just the canopy. We don't want it to go into the canopy, but then one of the features of this kind of forest that has no light coming in is that the trees drop their own branches. So we don't have a lot of the ladder fuels. And the coarse and the fine, what I find really interesting, if you toggle between these, they don't really overlap with each other. So where the trees have blown down, we have coarse, but other areas where the trees are bigger, they're dropping the fines. And so we don't really have that many places where we have both. And then the fire ladder, you can see we don't have huge areas of fire ladder potential, but when we put all of these together and then we look at, so yeah, for us, mostly fire ladder areas where we have this scrubby small trees growing, so they're actually the connectivity between the fuels on the ground and the canopy. So that's what it looks more like to us. I did notice, I think, someone had, I think it was Chesney, one of the photos you had up, I noticed that you did have some dead branches in one of the forest shots you had. We don't have that kind of thing. But when you overlay all of these, and then what we want to do, we don't have much resources, so how do we focus our attentions on the areas that are the greatest concern? And so we know we want to open up patchiness in the canopy. We don't have a lot of resources. It's very hard to get the permit to find the people to do the thinning and the money, etc. So what we did is we used ignition risk, knowing that humans are the primary cause. Then we overlaid this, and then we use this ignition risk where we've got people who are, it's completely covenanted, protected watershed, and there's no trespass allowed. But people do come mountain biking. Somebody killed a deer and tried to cook it, and underneath the cedar tree, and the branches caught fire. I mean, some crazy things still happen in there. And so what we did is fortunately, that was really close to the road, and the neighbor came up with the bulldozer and was able to, bury the fire. But we used this to help us to identify some of the hot spots where we might want to focus our attention. So some of the areas where the ignition probability is high enough. We have the various coarse, fine, closed canopy. And so this is, the reason why I'm talking about this is that fuels, I'm trying to teach a different way of thinking about fuels. Just a bunch of coarse trees on the ground. I was walking with Robert many times looking at a whole horizon of relatively large trees on the ground and saying, Robert, my meter, the Ruth meter is like in the danger zone. And he's like, nah, I'm not so worried about this because there's no ladders, and yeah, the canopy's closed, but there's no fine fuels on the ground. So it's a matter of kind of learning how to see the fuels. And that's one of the things that I'm really interested in conveying to people is like, we're so fearful, but there's actually a very logical kind of approach that you can use. Okay, sorry. So the approach that we're using for thinning, so we want to create gaps in the canopy. And we don't want to manage the various types of fuels. We don't have too many ladder fuels. So we're doing kind of a modified, what I call ecological thinning, with some of the GISS students had come out and worked with me, call it ecological forestry. I really love that term, so they completely get the idea of taking trees. There's so many trees that we need to remove some trees, and if there was one message I got from Keith Erickson about the work on Galiano, take more, not less. Because the trees, the canopies close very quickly. It doesn't take very long for them to move their branches around and close the canopy. So what we're doing is we're experimenting with the ideas of how exactly to create these spaces so that we don't have a continuous canopy. So those dark areas that I showed, we want to create some breaks in the canopy so we don't have a catastrophic fire that can move through. We also want to open up pockets of light to allow the native understory. So we have, it's a real desert there. It's mostly salal, some Oregon grape. I mean, it's really biologically depauperate forest. And it's because, to a large extent, it's the light. So we want to open it up. We want to do this in a way where we're retaining wildlife features. So we're retaining snags, we're retaining coarse woody debris, and we're actually creating opportunities for more plant communities to recover. And my question there is, do we still have a seed bank? So there's all kinds of really interesting questions that we're asking. We're doing monitoring to look at that. But some of the early part is, well, how do we actually do this retention and open it up? And what are the values that we're trying to retain in the forest? Some of the big trees want to get thicker bark so they're more fire resistant. We want to retain the cedar because we don't have so much cedar. It's quite small still. And then if we see a Pacific yew, we want to retain that. So we're doing a much more considered approach. And so what we're trying to do is figure out a way to remove. So what you're looking at here is two different ways of approaching thinning. The commercial thinning, which you see here on the left, is to remove equidistant, and that canopy closes really quickly afterwards. But they don't want the branches, so they actually like the shading, and that's purposely done so the trees can grow. They don't have a lot of living leaves at the top and branches. And so but that is not what we want. We want the light spaces to last longer. So what you see here in the bottom, the left and the right, are two different ways of thinning and taking the same amount of biomass, but leaving different kind of gap spaces. And so this is just kind of like a cartoon because it depends on the location and what the features are that you're trying to retain, what it would end up looking like. So I will just talk briefly about some of the issues and not the issues, but some of the things that we did. The area that we did, we used a demonstration area to make it very high profile and to convey this idea of thinning. Although there was a lot of wood on the ground, and it did, Adam, it did look kind of like not so great. So I understand that kind of like, if it makes you a little uncomfortable, that's probably something that I did. But we tried to do a balance between opening up areas, leaving wood behind, but there's so much wood, you can't leave it all. There's just too many trees, you can't leave them all. So we actually we worked with an ecological forester on island, Michael Nichols of Seven Ravens, and we gave him one of the trees to take away to just experiment with the idea about cost recovery. And it was a danger tree. It was a fairly large tree. The trees have a lot of potential for plywood veneer, for poles, for nice beams inside. So there could be high value products, medium to high value. Sometimes Michael makes flooring, hardwood flooring from trees. And he got, for this one tree, it was something on the order of $2,500 or $3,000 worth of materials out of it. So that's pretty good. And there's more trees than really we can leave on the ground. So this idea that I'm really interested in is how exactly could this become a sustainable ecological forestry practice that is employing people, arborists, foresters, and could be maybe generating some revenue to maintain the work. So some of the things that come up from this though is we want to leave some wood on the ground, and how do we manage these fuels? And if there's one thing that the BC Wildfire Services, fire rescue people, they're very concerned about is leaving fuels. If you remember that that photo that I showed of that sign that said, here's the forest before we treated it, and here's it afterwards. And they've removed all the woody materials from the ground. So we're up in this situation where we're being challenged about is it safe? And in talking to fire ecologists and fire experts, it's safe to leave wood as long as it's got breaks between it, it's discontinuous, and there's really nowhere that it can go. And then knowing on top of it that that fire, the kind of fire that we're concerned about is what they call 30-30-30. So you have over 30 degrees centigrade, so you have a heat dome, you have a hot period, you have below 30% relative humidity, and you have winds of over 30 kilometers an hour. And when those things come together, that is the recipe for a catastrophic fire where you can get these zombie fires igniting. And in the winter, when you look at the mainland, it seems so shocking, but winter is the dry season. So that is why these ignitions can happen on the mainland. But we still need to convince people that it's safe to leave fuel. So we've been doing a few things, and I'm just going to run through a couple of examples. I'm almost sort of at the end of what I wanted to talk to you about today, just a kind of sampling of what we're doing. We're still collecting the data. We did the thinning it feels like so long ago, but it was only about 15 months ago that we did the thinning. And with some of the wood, so as I said, we removed a little bit of wood. The other wood, we did things called assembled nurse logs, which I'll talk to you a little bit about, which is trying to replace some of the large old downed trees that would have been present, because we have about 120, 140 years potentially of the removal, extraction of trees. And so we have soils that are largely minerals. So we have very limited biological activity in the forest. We also built some swales are very tried and true berm and swales permaculture method that we're working with permaculturalists to adapt and put into the forest to improve water retention and accelerate the decomposition of the woody materials, but also creating a lot of wildlife habitat at the same time. So there's a number of things that we're doing, and I put on the bottom right there, you see that we've got someone on Salt Spring who came from Germany, working for a company where they make these pyrolysis canisters that you can put in a truck and move. And it's a biochar method that's completely closed, and it burns based on plasma, just a very tiny fire that started at the bottom. And that you can leave it safely closed overnight, it burns itself up, and then you have biochar the next day. So the idea is like a portable biochar, safe way of burning that we'd be able to do through a larger period of time, and then putting that back into the forest, because it's another trait that's missing, is the burn materials into the forest. So there's a bunch of things that we're trying. And also mycelial grafts in the bottom left, with the idea of how do we get this material to hold moisture and not be fuel. So how can we turn this word fuel and shift people's attitudes about these things? So I just want to talk a little bit about the assembled nurse log. So this is not something that we're advocating for the public. The public is more a swale. You have a low area, you put some wood in, you put some soil on top of it. This is what you can do when you get branches and all kinds of debris on your property. You can put it back into your own property in a safe way, with lots of benefits in creating wildlife habitat. This one is for when you're doing larger areas and you're not going to be removing the wood for firewood or anything like that, but you're trying to put it back into the system. And it was a suggestion that came to us from Talon Angle, who contacted me with this idea. We had been talking about something similar to this. He'd been experimenting with this idea of using wood chips and some of these logs and building essentially a large fallen log and putting it into place using again permaculture ideas that you can create a sealed structure that effectively behaves like a single log. So we set those up. And so here's a pretty fresh one. These are photos from Talon. You can see on the left, that's a relatively recently put up one. And this is just a year later that you can see the blackberries and other vegetation is growing over. And so what we're interested in, we've done 5 of these in our treatment area, and we're monitoring for the moisture levels of the wood chips inside. We're looking at how much heat is going to accumulate inside, because we don't want them to self-combust. Mm-hmm. And we're also looking at colonization by various types of critters and plants. This is a little video showing people making it just for your amusement. So I had restoration and natural systems students who are always dying to get out in the field. And some of our GISS high school students came to help us with this. And it was one of the, after all the work of figuring out how to find a mobile scaler, how to get the stamps for the wood, how to find, you know, the whole thing, the wildlife danger tree stuff, everything. This particular day was a real highlight for me because everyone was instructed in what to do. We had a few people overseeing everything. And at one point I just stepped back and I watched the intensity and enthusiasm of people building these, and it was really, made me feel really like we had gotten somewhere. And this is where the term ecological forestry was coined. So this watershed area, I didn't mention them, but North Salt Spring Waterworks is the improvement district that is stewarding this area. And this thinning technique, they're building now a water treatment plant because they've just been using chlorine up till now. And we're going to be developing this kind of fire break prescription to protect the lake, and also the new DAF plant, dissolved air flocculation plant that they're putting in. So I feel also very pleased about that our practice is actually being adopted by the improvement district. So a little bit of chatting. It's a long weekend. It literally was a long weekend. People thought it was crazy that we had people here. So then the next thing, you know, as I mentioned, we have this issue of the hydrology. It's been really modified. And so just in closing, I just wanted to mention where we're going with that. And so the berm and swale structure is something that meets all of our objectives. Like that is really a solution for getting the organics into the ground, dealing with the issue of so-called fuels in a safe way, and then building up the soil properties and improving the water retention for the forests. So that is something that we're looking along the side of the road. You can see the other issue we have here is erosion and sedimentation from the ditches. And so another thing that I'm working on is no more ditches. So that's what my other project in my life, I'd like to see everyone become anti-ditch. And what's interesting is we're working with the Ministry of Transportation on this, and they're completely on side. And one of the reasons they don't divert water into forests more is they're not allowed to do that because if it's private land, they can't divert water. So it's not that they don't understand that this is actually a good thing. So they're really very happy to work with us, and we're going to be doing this because this water is going towards the lake and it exceeds public health nitrogen, phosphorus, and turbidity levels. So that affects the quality of the water and the treatment requirements for the water. So it's a really nice, request a variance for the contract so that MCON is not in breach of their responsibility to maintain those ditches. So there are all these unusual things that are coming up as we do this, but I think I see this as an opportunity for the agencies to show that there are better ways to do things. So thank you, and then, you know.
You're curious by telling everybody off that there is an issue of power limitation in this building, so we overloaded something, but that doesn't seem to be the case.
The video, it might be the video.
I don't think so.
No,
I
okay.
think this is an actual power outage somewhere.
Okay.
I have questions.
Yeah.
Take questions.
Please, yes.
One was the mapping you had that showed like the areas of like larger green lines. How exactly is that? I'm just very confused how that.
Yeah.
Like, somehow their data or they're
It's-
going on the ground.
We used a variety of layers to do that assessment. So I developed with Robert, we developed a workshop, like a short workshop on exactly that methodology. So I'm gonna try to work that out because it's kind of, the idea is like, I think there were like 3 or 4 different layers, because every set of data that you use is a little different, and then to help you interpret the LiDAR. So LiDAR is the most up to date, but we use some of the historic, Island Trust data as well to try to get a sense of what the landscape looks like. Tree density was really important. So first you do kind of the remote sensed version of it. You get a sense of how things are breaking up, and then you actually go to different areas and do a visual assessment to see what are the features that we're seeing that actually that we mapped out. Are they real? Are they not real? So we did ground truthing to actually get a sense of that. And what else?
Okay.
Mostly it's that, it's the ground truthing. I don't think you like, my approach on remote sense data is it's a good starting point. But it's not good enough, and we can't fly drones through, because that was another thing we thought about, because we don't have any. I mean, it's a very close canopy, but also there's no satellite or data for us to operate them, so it would be very difficult to, without a very expensive drone.
So early on, you said something about the forest and the groundwater. And you know how I just didn't quite get it. I've been studying this for a long time.
Yeah.
And some of the water experts trust us that I'm wrong. But it is true that if you if you cut the forest and it gets dry, that eventually you will affect the groundwater. Because for many reasons, but do you have like references that confirm that, or just your own data confirm?
Well, my data is not, I'm working with a hydrologic engineer right now on a model, because I forget the name of the big consulting company that does all the municipal watershed models. They made the assumptions about groundwater, and I looked at these, I read the report, I thought, I don't know where these assumptions come from, because they assume very little groundwater importance in the watershed. And I do not believe that's true at all. Not, even when you just look at the extent of the drainage and the ditching that was required to keep the water table down, that indicates huge amounts of water. So, and I've had Robin out there, and she said, if these things would flood right back up in no time at all. What I do know is there was, I can't remember his name, Barry. I did some work with people from public health in Ottawa, and they were looking at drought. And so it's not for forested areas, but the effects on the soil have been very well confirmed, that when you don't have any vegetation, so same with an agricultural field, when there's no vegetation, then you get a drought. What happens is all the soil organisms are cooked.
Yeah.
The soils collapse and they become very, very compacted. And then the interesting thing, and I talk about this a lot, what I learned working with them is immediately following a drought, there's always an extraordinarily heavy rain. It's just a function of how the weather system's used. So then you get this intense rain, and they're less concerned about drought than they are the flooding, because then you get all this massive surface materials moving. And so the erosion is huge, the accumulated bacteria, viruses, various organisms, that's when they start to see these huge disease outbreaks, when all the soil is mobilized. And that's because the soils need to have a slow penetration of water in order to stabilize. And then that also is important for the groundwater recharge. So it's really well established in agricultural zones, the impact and the compaction of the soil. It would absolutely be true here. Plus the area, there's two areas that burnt in 1930s and 1940s and the watershed, and it's just mineral soil. That's it. It was just burnt right down to mineral soil. So it's an equivalent, right? So you've got a slope, you have some fire, you've got no organics left whatsoever, and then the water just moves everything. So I guess I'd say, Lisa, the best data sets for that would be from looking at drought in agriculture, and then also just trying to think of the person's name. There's a watershed modeler at SFU who's very controversial with the province because he criticized their hydrologic models for watersheds. He said the forestry models are completely wrong because they weren't factoring in a lot of these kind of features. But if you send me a note, then I can look up his name.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Are there any other questions for Ruth before we give her a round of applause?
I just have a quick comment, when I was looking at your nurse log experiment there, it just reminded me a lot of a hugelkultur, but right, so. Is that what it's based on?
It is. I mean, really, what we're doing is we're adapting forestry practice. So I'm working with foresters, I'm working with permaculturalists.
Right.
And they've got, like, the other thing that we're trying, I forget the name of it, it's the living compost. No, it's not the kashi, it's where you put the green materials together with the hollow cones in it, so you're getting aeration. I can't remember what it's called. It's and then you get, so we're doing that. So Jane Squire, if anyone knows her on Salt Spring Permaculturist. So Jane said, Ruth, I've got this idea. So we took cedar and dead fir green branches and we built a composter to try to generate the microbiology that then we could put with our plants that we're propagating to, so we're adapting a lot of different permaculture and forestry techniques. Really cool.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. Thank you so much for this presentation. This is great. And I feel like we have a fun conversation going back and forth. Various work that we're doing here. It's the same stuff we're all dealing with.
Yeah.
When you're doing the thinking work and you're looking at trying to open up space for a greater diversity of species to come in, how are you managing the deer browse in those areas? Or are you concerned about that in terms of limiting the diversity of what comes back?
Yeah, so it was really, one of the things I love so much about this project, bringing in all these different experts and it's like, if you want to go for a walk, you want a herpetologist, you want an ornithologist, you want a geologist, right? Like, this is like, you bring people in and you duke it out. So we've got all kinds of opinions on that. So it's like, some people are like, it's the deer. And then you've got, so that's the Conservancy people are like, it's the deer. Like, okay, yes, it's the deer, but there is also no light. So we have, the ecologists going, there's no light. If there's no light here, you're not gonna get anything. And then I thought, well, what if there's no seed bank? Right? So there's no seed bank. What if there's no seed bank? There's been no, it's the topography is really not level at all. We get these heavy rains, we've got no soils. What if it's just being washed away? So what we did is we set up exclosures. And so I've been putting seeds on both sides and put some native plants in. And we're looking at the survival on both sides, and so that's gonna look at the browse issue. I'm also gonna be, taking information about the specific light reaching each one of the plants, so that we can actually do more of a proper analysis of it, because light can vary over a very short distance. But, you know, the only thing that's been eating the plants we put in so far are ravenous insects. The insects are like, wow, look, a herd. We haven't seen one of these in so long. So what's interesting is they really mowed a lot of them down, but the plants came back. So I'm really interested to see what happens. I've got a feeling that it's everything.
Yeah.
Same answer.
Yeah.
Not, I'm sure it's right, I just, yeah.
Just one more sort of.
Sure.
So in the Galiano Conservancy, we own we have a lot of holdings. I'm involved with the Islands Trust Conservancy. We also have a lot of holdings. And a lot of people in various communities are, like, we become afraid of our forests.
Yeah.
Because of what you talked about at the beginning. Do you think we should all, as conservation organizations, be doing some sort of look at our properties in terms of fire risk reduction to somehow ease the public's fear of the forest? Like, that's really bothering me, because I've talked at Islands Trust council meetings, and I get a lot of questions about the Islands Trust Conservancy. Well, how are you managing fire? We gotta cut off fire forest and.
Or get rid of all the fuels on the
Yeah,
ground,
yeah.
right? Like, yeah, it's
What
that.
happened to course woody debris, like in the forest?
Well, I mean, that's why I'm doing these studies. I'm trying to get moisture measures and, you know, I'm trying to actually show it. I mean, it's all established in the permaculture community,
Yeah.
but it hasn't been put into, to my knowledge, I don't know of it being put into forestry settings. I think that is really, really critically important. I mean, the first pushback that I got, and the strongest pushback, was from conservation-minded people. And then I also heard from the old multi-generational logging community, the people who are foresters on the island, that their great grandfathers were doing it, and they said, the forests have always been like this. Maybe since you got here, you know, so there's a lot of, like, on both sides, there's this idea that, like, this is what do you mean? This is a natural forest. And then the conservation community, so interestingly, the conservation community is coming around faster on this issue, but there's so much fear about liability and leaving fuels on the ground, and there's no science. Which is why here I am on, like, duct tape and matchsticks trying to collect the data to show that this actually is safe to do. Yeah, I think we need a big education campaign to normalize the idea. And then the other is, and I got a little bit of pushback on this too, like, you're working with foresters and you're cutting trees, but I mean, this could be the 21st century jobs.
Yeah.
For the islands could be, you know, fire risk reduction and sustainable forest harvests, right? I mean, I think that that's a conversation we should be having, because it would be pretty hard to shoot it down. You know, it's good to remove trees. It employs people. Some people get, I think the value adding is the big thing though. So we could have, what was interesting is, you know, I love the guy I was working with, and he wanted to help us because we didn't have a lot of money, and I was just really wanting to do a proof of concept of, like, cost recovery, just a small one. And, you know, you have to there's so many steps to do it. Because it's all set up for commercial forestry, so it's very heavy, and if you have to go to more than one property, then it would become even more complicated. But here he was, he said, well, you know, Ruth, you know, if I just took these more trees down, and then we get 2 truckloads out of here, and we can go over to Duncan and you can get this much money. I was like, whoa, 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 that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is we're trying to do value added, but right away people go to how can we get you more money for this?
Yeah.
So that's another, like, he was really trying to, like, oh, I got this idea, Ruth, we could really help you with the revenue. And I could see it's coming from a really good place. So the trick is gonna be, how could we do this? I don't think we could recover all the costs, but how could we do it in a way where it doesn't spiral out of control. And people wanna take the big trees, but we wanna leave the big trees, like, there's still a lot of. I don't know how to handle all that. But conservancies, I think, and land trusts would be the best, because then they could show like really good stewardship. And then that would be a model, and that's the other thing that I'm working on now. There's just this grant with I'm gonna apply for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to develop training courses for local government, and I just developed 4 courses last year based on my experience with the thinning, about all the things people need to know. And I developed the curriculum, we did a first run last year, and they're kind of ready to go, so I'm gonna apply for this. And I'm talking to you, Vic, about this new program, the continuing studies for micro-credential courses, because I think like our first stumbling block is actually to have people who actually are qualified to do these things with us. Because there are a lot of people who do it, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily are qualified or that you can safely recommend them to someone to do. So that's another part of what I'm thinking is, wouldn't it be great if we could actually get some credentials out there and then we can say, hey, here's the name of all these people that you could have come and do this work on your property or with on your properties or private property, like homeowner or whatever. That's another, like, I just found so many capacity issues when I went through this that need to be tackled.
Yeah. I think we tried.
Amazing.
It's 4:45. Thank you very much, Michelle. That was very, very interesting, and certainly it's the start of a longer conversation. So thank you so much. I encourage you to come up and